I recently refinished a 3-foot by 5-foot table that's 15 square feet, and I ran out of a finish that I was pretty fond of using called Deft, D-E-F-T, Deft, and I couldn't find any here where I live and didn't want to ship any in, so I thought, well, I have used urethanes before, and I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and use that. The table had lots of imperfections. It hadn't been refinished in many years, so there were scrapes in it and some other imperfections that I wanted to sand out and then fill back into a nice smooth surface. So I sanded it starting with 120, then 150, and then 220. And I wanted to put 2 coats of this, this one. This semi-gloss polyurethane. The reason I wanted to start with semi-gloss is that the lower gloss urethanes sand easier. They'll fill just fine, but when it comes to resanding, that these are not as hard. So I put the first coat on after washing the table off, literally, and drying it perfectly. I prepared my brush with mineral spirits and made sure it was clean. I brushed it and brushed it. I blow the brush out with compressed air, clean as a whistle. Everything on my end is perfectly clean. So I put the first coat on, and I noticed there was all kinds of bits of junk in the urethane, and it sure looked like little tiny specks, if you will, of polyurethane. I thought, well, I didn't shake it, and I worked out of the top of the can by using a smaller brush. I have an All Paints sash brush, and I just took that out, did the edges of the table, and then put portions of polyurethane onto the table and spread them out with an oil-based paintbrush, 4-inch. So it went on very well, but there was just so much junk when I was done putting it on. I was kind of disappointed. So I thought, well, I'm going to sand it off anyway, and I did. And this time with 150 and then 220, washed the table, rinsed it. Everything is clean, dry, perfect. You can see it. By the way, I was doing this inside, so there's no wind blowing. I moved the table, set some tarps down, put the table back on, and hand sanded it. No machine sanding. It was all done by hand. It's only 15 square feet. So I just thought it'd be better to have it inside so that there would be no chance of any kind of bugs landing on it or anything like that. Thought I did everything right. So I thought, well, maybe it's a bad batch, old batch of polyurethane, something. So this time what I did is I drew half of the can off slowly and poured it into this container. I doubled up on a paint sock filter and then put a coffee filter on top of that. And I poured in very slowly. It will drain through this. So I got through pouring half a can into this cup through these filtering elements, and there was nothing really appreciable inside of this little tiny filter. Look at the close-knit nature of this filtering element. The screen size is very, very small. So anyway, I thought, well, maybe there's stuff coming off my brush or whatever. So I washed the brush again really, really well. Everything is going pretty much to plan on my end. Put another coat on, same thing. All kinds of garbage in there, and I looked at it and it's like, for sure, it's polyurethane junk. There's some kind of polyurethane junk. So I thought, well, I already planned on putting 4 coats on, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this semi-gloss, because I was gonna anyway. Sanded the table off again with 150 and then 220. Cleaned the table off, cleaned my brush, and everything just perfectly. So I thought, well, I'm going to see if I'm right and if it wasn't this can of stuff just giving me a hard time. So brushes are clean as a whistle. They almost look brand new. So I lay out a coat of this clear gloss, and there's junk in it, just like this one. And I'm thinking, man, I'm crazy. You know, what am I doing wrong here? So I was in trouble here because I'm going to put 2 coats of this on, but there was way more debris in this material than I had hoped for. The reason I was in trouble is because gloss, no matter what you read on the internet about spar urethane being soft, gloss spar urethane is very hard. Put some on something and try to sand it compared to semi-gloss. You're going to notice right away that this gloss finish is hard. So I had to go back and use 120, 150, 220, and I'm washing in between coats, folks. I mean, so when you're sanding this stuff down, you don't just go from sandpaper to sandpaper grit. You have to wash that dust, that sanding material off in between your grits, because all that powdery junk is on there. So I did that. Buckets of water, drying it off, everything, because I want it to be, you know, completely free of junk before I sand anymore, because the loading of the sandpaper. So anyway, I laid a coat of this on, and just full of junk again. So I thought, okay, fine. I had already used this straining method, so I'm going to use it again in hopes that it might work for this. I will admit I was a little pessimistic. All this was clean. You can see how clean this is. I cleaned stuff off. I mean, it takes a couple quarts of mineral spirits to go through a project like this. So all of this stuff would be perfectly clean, brand new cup, all that. Pour half of it off into this, and working out of this cup, lay it out there, and it was better. But still, I mean, the table was just unacceptably full of junk. So I thought, well, there's something going on here. And you can tell when you're looking at stuff, whether it's lint or, I don't know, stuff from sandpaper, like grains of sand or something like that. This was obviously urethane debris. It's just little tiny chunks of urethane. So I don't know how much it costs where you live, but this is $30 for these quarts each. So that's $60 plus tax for 2 quarts of polyurethane. Anyway, it's a lot of money. So I thought, well, I don't want to switch brands right now because I don't want there to be compatibility issues. So I thought, well, maybe the manufacturing process is a little different for the spray cans. Now at this point, that means I have to take this table outside, lay out some tarps, and do the whole process over again, starting from 120 grit to 150 grit to 220 grit, washing and drying in between sanding grits. So I researched this stuff, and you know, there was some comments about it being soft and all that stuff, and I knew that was not going to be an issue for me because I'm buying gloss. So looking at it and seeing what it says here, it says shake a lot, and you can tell I already took the caps off, by the way. If you saw my previous videos about saving these caps, these cans are empty, so I already took those off. But Anyhow, so I shook them up really good, and when I took the caps off here, knowing that this is kind of, I think this is the same company as Rust-Oleum, the very same spray tips as Rust-Oleum. And if you've been using any kind of specialty Rust-Oleum, those tips have a reputation for clogging. And reading the reviews for this material, I read that people were having a hard time with the spray tips dripping and clogging. So I'm thinking, man, I'm going to take a little extra precaution here. So clear Spar Urethane gloss. So what I did to sort of help my chances along here was I got this bucket, and I filled it up to about here on the can with warm water. Not really hot, not boiling out of a tea kettle, but just warm water. And I set these cans in there and got them nice and warmed up while I was sanding and finishing cleaning up the table and doing all that. So took them out, dried them off. Now the main thing is warming this stuff up not only helps it flow better, but it energizes that aerosol. Gives it a little bit more pressure for spraying. So heating it up a little bit, it really helped. Now don't put them in upside down because you're going to get water in this rim area and you don't want that. When you take them out, you're going to want to dry it off completely because you don't want water on your project, right? So I'm going to go ahead and leave this cap on here. One other thing that I did, I'm going to use my little bench here, is I like to spray going forward. So if I'm starting here, I like to spray like this and cover them ahead of me so there's no overspray. So I'm basically spraying forward and then I'm creating my wet finish this way. Well, I didn't want to do that in this particular case because if the tip started to clog or drip, then I would be dropping from here straight down onto my finish. So I did it the other way, and I recommend this totally. It did work. I started from the far edge, and again, this is just a spray pattern. I had my all paints sash brush in my pocket, so if finish started to drop from here down ahead of me, I could just brush it and then I could cover it with the spray pattern as I go. So hoping for the best. Now remember, I had shook this, warmed it up in the pail, dried off the can so no water would drip, and I started going this way, backwards, and just keeping everything slow and perfectly wet the whole time. So it's kind of, if you sprayed stuff, you're almost thinking there's going to be some overspray in this direction. In this case, I was very lucky in that it didn't do that. The material just was all perfectly wet, really glossy. So I did the whole table. This can, look, on the website it says it's 40 square feet. No way. This put a perfect, nicely laid out, smooth as can be coat, one coat over that table that was 15 square feet. And when I was done with the far edge over here of that table, that was it. This can was just about empty. There you go, you can see. So the bad news is that even doing that, all this stuff, there was still junk in that finish. And you look up there, and I looked and looked and looked at that material, and it is obviously little specks of polyurethane. And how it got out of this can, I have no idea. I really can't tell you. So anyway, there's some words of caution there that maybe I just got a bad batch, but I mean, I'm using semi-gloss, gloss in quarts, and then gloss in cans. And it still had stuff in it. I have no explanation for it. I'm just telling you my experience. Do not depend on this can doing 40 square feet. There's just no way you're going to cover it evenly that way. It did go on evenly, and I was really impressed with that part of it. I think heating the can up with some warm water and shaking it really good prevented that nozzle, which is just, if you've used Rust-Oleum, there's nothing special about the nozzle that comes with this polyurethane, folks. The Spar Urethane, there's nothing special about it. So I had an extra can, and I did put 2 coats on it. It's the same story. And if that tip would have clogged, it would have been a real hassle. So just a little word of warning about all this stuff, and keeping that can shook up and warm really kept the tip from clogging. I do believe that, and I hope that's your experience too, because if you don't have an extra can handy and that tip clogs, then you're losing the wetness of that finish as you're going like this, and you have to stop and clear a spray tip. I don't know how you could recover from that and have it turn out evenly. I just have no idea. But I was real thankful that this covered the size of my project just almost perfectly, and it was 15 square feet. Anyway, sorry for the long video, but if you're into spraying stuff and using this Varathane, Spar Urethane, or Polyurethane, just a word of warning. I'm not trying to denigrate the company or anything like that. Maybe I made some mistake that I don't know about, but that totally happened to me, everything that I'm telling you. And maybe you could try a different brand or something like that. But if you're buying this stuff, just be really careful and know what you're getting into, and it could happen to you. But I will give one positive review, and that is once this material got warmed up, and I did modify, that's my mod in this case, is their directions about how to get this can ready to spray. My mod would be totally warming up that can and some warm water, and keeping it, again, don't forget, when you take it out of that water, you got to dry it off. And but it did spray perfectly, that's for sure. And I give a lot of props to that, because that made me feel real good knowing that I didn't have any issues with that spray tip. So the end of the story is that when I put the second coat on, that it did come out better than the material out of the quart cans. Was it a hassle to have to go through the extra step? Yes. I lost 1 day of drying time, and that means I'm going to have to wait 3 days. I'm waiting 3 days for this to harden up. So that just pushed that back 1 day. So I had to sand 1 more day and wait 1 more day. So it pushed back the whole project 1 day because of the quart can failure. But this did lay out nice and smooth. There's junk in the finish. It's obviously little chunks of urethane, but it's so much better than the quart cans. It just looks better, and everyone agreed that it was good enough. Probably going to hand polish it, but there was a big difference in the amount of garbage in the urethane from the spray can. It just turned out a lot better. So maybe they strained it differently at the factory. I don't know. But anyway, that's kind of the end of the story, is that it's better to spray if you can, in my opinion, because of the amount of stuff in the urethane, or use a completely different product. Now, hopefully it won't happen to you like it happened to me.